Hey and welcome. Truthiverse is an audience-supported podcast and an audience-supported Substack as well. You can find me over there on Substack at official Brendan Murphy. And if you enjoy this work, please join the growing body of consciously evolving minds and voyage with us into forgotten and forbidden realms of knowledge. So do hit that like button, share with your fellow seekers, and if you hadn't yet, please do consider becoming a paid subscriber, whether it's over on my Substack or through buying me a coffee right here via the podcast. Also, feel free to check out my private evolutionary accelerator, Evolve Yourself, over at evolveyourself.live for the free masterclass. And of course, I do invite you to join me inside the members-only Truthiversity for all premium content, including part 2 of every podcast. See truthiversity.com for more information. Researching, writing, and podcasting is what I do full-time, so thanks in advance for your support. It does mean a lot to me. This week, it's my pleasure to bring Joachim Hagopian back on the show. Now, just in brief, Joachim is a West Point graduate, a former Army officer, and author of Don't Let the Bastards Get You Down, exposing a faulty US military leadership system based on ticket punching up the seniority ladder, invariably weeding out the best and brightest, leaving mediocrity and order followers rising to the top as politician bureaucrat generals designated to lose every modern US war by elite design. After the military, Joachim earned a master's degree in clinical psychology and worked as a licensed therapist in the mental health field with abused youth and adolescents for more than a quarter century. In Los Angeles, he found himself battling the largest county child protective services in the nation within America's thoroughly broken and corrupt child welfare system. He's also authored a monumental expose of the pedophilia network, which we'll mention during the show and towards the end as well. I'll give you some links there to get in touch with Joachim's work. And without further ado, let's bring him on to talk about what everyone's talking about at the moment, the Israel-Palestine situation, and get into a little bit of the perspective that just, accidentally gets omitted from the mainstream world and even a lot of the alternative media. All right, enjoy the show.
Been doing it now for 10 years.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Before that, I was a therapist working with children for many, many years, like 27 years. And then, of course, I have a West Point background and spent a little time in the military as a young man. Those were some heady days, heady and heavy, both. But yeah, it puts me pretty much where I'm at now, here in Bali, enjoying the good life.
Yeah, brother. Well, I'm glad someone is. It's a good place to operate from if you're going to do the kind of heavy lifting that you're doing as well, because God knows, you're dealing with a lot of stuff on a daily basis that is pretty intense and, pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, when I started out 10 years ago in America doing this, and I figured, well, I'm going to be on some list. They're going to give me some shit. And I don't have this illusion of security being here, because if they want you, they can get you anywhere in the world. They can track and all this kind of shit. So, but peace of mind. That's what I got here that I didn't have in America. And of course, we all know, like they have that expression, Rome is burning. Well, America is burning. In fact, all of Europe and basically Australia, New Zealand, all of we can get into this, but all of the continents that are the wealthiest with the dominant white population, they are the target, because they become the most resistive to the New World Order, one world government, totalitarian police state. So they've been targeted, and the numbers are dropping as far as population. They are in a full-fledged depopulation agenda now, and it's working so far, and they're working on nuclear war now. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think it ever has been as obvious, the depopulation agenda. It became, in 2021, it became so obvious, it was undeniable and unavoidable. It was in our faces every day.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic overreach, that's what did it, as far as a lot of people are beginning to get it, and the damage is there. If you do any kind of research at all, I mean, it's overwhelming. And the population, I believe, is shrinking. I believe, we don't know the real numbers. It's impossible to track exactly, but It's many millions that have died so far. Many millions will continue dying. And then they've got all these weapons of mass destruction that are other than, the pandemic. And they got more it's all bioweapon, and they got them all lined up. They got biolabs everywhere in the world, and they can pull out anything that's far more lethal than that fake pandemic that they gave us a few years ago.
Yeah. Let's one thing I really want to get into, early on, right off the bat, is this very dramatic situation that's being broadcast. Obviously, something is happening. Something very significant is happening in Israel and Palestine and Gaza. And I know you've been interested in this realm for a long time, for many years, much longer than most people. And you actually write about it. You published an article recently on Jim Fetz's blog, I saw, which I've read. Yeah. So, you're one of the more, to me anyway, one of the more knowledgeable people, and someone who understands the sort of globalist, big picture kind of aspect of it, rather than getting stuck in the, this side and that side and whatever, all that sort of tribalistic stuff, which is super unhelpful, which is still where most people seem to be, unfortunately. Even in the truth community, we see a lot of this. Yep. Even people who are starting to catch on to other things like the scamdemic and whatever, this Israel-Palestine thing comes along and they're like taking sides as per their programming. It's unbelievable to watch.
Yeah. I mean, they got us pretty well brainwashed into thinking like white and black, this guy's the good guy, this guy's the bad guy. And whoever they're pitting against each other, it's not them. It's the fucking monsters behind them that are pulling all the strings. And the people are very slow to catch on to this reality because it takes into account, the dynasty families that have been in control for centuries. That those are the real enemies that are doing all these weapons of mass destruction to depopulate our planet. It is them. It is not this group versus this group, but people they're so entrenched in that kind of black and white thinking that it's hard for them to get out of that. And it is like a brainwash, mind control brainwash.
Completely. I mean, people are lied to from day one of their lives. And then, it's like a fish born into water. The fish doesn't really have a concept of water. It's just surrounded by it all the time. It's just the way things are, right? It's invisible. And that's the way I compare that to the way that we're brought into this brainwashing machinery. People don't see it because it's there from day one. It's invisible to them. I've got some things I want to touch on, but I just got a message 10 minutes ago, 10 minutes before we were scheduled to start, from a guy I haven't spoken to in many years. And this dude was living in Australia. He's actually the older brother of one of my friends from childhood. And I don't know how he ever saw anything I posted on Instagram, but I got a message from him 10 minutes before we were scheduled to start. It's the first time I've heard from this guy in like 20 years, right? Basically lambasting me for my delusional points of view about what's going on the Israel-Hamas front. And the idea was, and I'll circle back to this, but I was just speaking to the programming aspect of this. Like, this is someone who was raised primarily, as far as I know, in Australia. So they weren't even in the bubble of like the Israeli bubble, where the propaganda is at its most intense and the filtration of information would be at its most intense. And we know that the IDF, I just posted a short little video, Joachim, and I'm sure you could talk about this kind of thing. And I think if you want to, please do. I was talking about a guy I met around 2014 who had worked in the IDF, and he told us about how they roamed around the region of Palestine, Israel, and they actually the IDF put up propaganda posters that were anti-Israeli propaganda posters designed to make it look like it was created by Palestinians, Hamas and what have you, so as to continue to foment this hatred and this division and this conflict, to keep it going. This is the Israeli government doing this, psyoping its own people. But not everyone can seem to grasp this, that there's this other level of agenda here playing out.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of people that are getting it now. And I've never been one to fall into this whole, he's the good guy, he's the bad guy. But I have to say, the more research I do on these so-called Khazars, Ashkenazi, non-Semites, the more research, and you do a little history that the King Bulan and the ultimatum that Russia and the Slavs and our surrounding peoples made because they were engaged in all kinds of satanic kind of ritual and blood sacrifice and all this and they would steal from people on the Silk Road, and kill them. And I mean, from the history beginning, over a century ago, these people haven't changed, and they've infiltrated all the governments, all the, UK is loaded with them, United States, Australia, all of them, Europe, all of them are loaded with these people in huge levels of power. It's unbelievable. And of course, they look out for themselves and they raise up and hire within the families and all this kind of shit. And they have this unbelievable amount of power on this earth plane, almost like, the old expression, the devil's dominion is the earth. Well, who's the devil? I don't want to just paint a whole blank picture, because of course they use the anti-Semitic label as their weapon. So you can't say anything about Israel. You cannot criticize, or you might even go to jail. They've got all kinds of fucking laws against this now, where you can't even talk about reality. You can't even tell the truth without some kind of punishment, like you are a bad guy, an extremist, a terrorist. They all this lined up to protect and insulate their evil, and it's just, and they've had this for centuries. For centuries, they've been pulling this shit. They're very intelligent in the way of how to connive and outsmart people, take advantage. I mean, I'm not just drawing. I always have to go back. We always have to do this caveat. Well, no, they're not all this way. There are good people. There's a whole bunch of them that are good, and they're out of the loop. They're not the powerful ones, And what we've seen is these non-Semites have basically abused their own people. So, the Ashkenazis, they were the ones that were lined up in all the concentration camps in World War II. And then they're abusing the 80% of the Palestinians that have Semite blood in them. They are the non-Semites, the anti-Semitic. They are that because they're killing these people. And, that is their agenda. It's a genocide, apartheid agenda. It's been this way forever, from 47 and 48 all the way to now. That has been their agenda. Get rid of these people and take over. And they did it, and they had no legitimate claim to, we're reclaiming our old homeland, our ancient biblical homeland. Bullshit, It's all lies. So, it's hard for me to witness this and not speak out. I cannot, I have to keep going as long as I can. Because the people have to know the truth, for them to get a consequence for their, criminal behavior.
Right. And, the more people who are aware to the agenda and what's going on and don't fall prey to the propaganda and the division, that really helps to undermine the general effectiveness. In the end, gradually it undermines the effectiveness of what they're doing when we stop empowering them and withdraw our energy from this ridiculous system of mind control that they've set up. I want to ask you, Joachim, specifically, like we've been told, and I've got your article here, we've been told that on the Saturday of October, let's see,
7.
It was October 7. We've got this music festival on the southern Israel border next to Gaza. Attack, murdered by Hamas, paragliding into the area with guns blazing. How on earth could Israel's, defense forces possibly drop the ball on this?
Well, they didn't drop the ball. They planned it, set it up. That it's all about that. They knew everything was coming. I mean, there was. I mean, first of all, who's got the best intelligence network in the world? Israel. I mean, and the Mossad and the military intelligence there are who's got the best technologies, the most advanced technologies. They've surpassed Silicon Valley with this. And in December 2021, less than 2 years ago, they spent over 3 years building for almost $1 billion a new wall between, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, separating them, putting them into this open air prison, the largest in the world. They spent all this money, all this time. They got all the advanced sensors going. Anybody comes close, they know there's, the reality is if a person comes close, there's 20 Jeeps out there with rifles pointed at them. That's the reality. So all of a sudden, whoops, you took us by surprise. I mean, if you just do a little basic research, it's totally unfathomable that they would even be able to get away with this, because it's absurd that they were surprised. They were not surprised. They set it up. And I reckon it, and then, I ran across in my research that not only, with them being the best at figuring shit out when it comes to intelligence and the quote, enemy's next move, so to speak, but I came across articles where the Egyptian intelligence was filling them that, hey, there's all this activity going on in Gaza. They knew about it. They set it up. So I reckon it to Franklin Delano Roosevelt back during World War II. They were not in the war, America, and it was like December 1941 when Pearl Harbor happened. Well, they'd set up an embargo against Japan. They set it all up so Japan would become the aggressor, and they knew, intelligence knew. We're talking like, over 80 years ago, the intelligence back then knew that there was a Japanese attack coming. It was all mapped out, and Roosevelt played passive, just like Netanyahu, and let it happen. Over 1,000 Americans' lives lost, the whole naval fleet out there. My dad was on submarines. He happened to be out at sea at the time in his submarine, so he didn't get it. But a whole bunch of ships wrecked, and the start of World War II for America, But, and then you even go to, August, Maui fires. What do? They send all their emergency head people off the island and then do the strike, the whole, direct energy weapon attack, that's what they do. They get rid of the people. 911, you go back, it's the same deal. What do? The NORAD, North American Air Command, what did they do? They sent all the fighter jets off for testing. It's the same bullshit game they play every time. Why? Because it always works. The people don't get it. That's the problem. They use the same method of deception over and over again, because it always works. The vast majority of the people just accept, oh, those terrible terrorist Arabs are doing it again to us. War on terror, here we go, same thing over and over and over. And when you watch this, you actually get, so what their next move will be. And that's why, it's a matter of, eventually, maybe we may reach critical mass where enough people get it, and then there, finally becomes some kind of consequence for all the criminal behavior. Maybe. I'm not even convinced it's going to happen. They might annihilate the human race, and we never reach critical mass. It's a race with time right now, really, because they know that more people are getting it, and they know that there's going to be all kinds of karmic consequences involved for their criminal behavior for centuries, and that people are finding out. So they're escalating this, basically the genocidal war against the human race is being escalated as we speak.
Right. So coming back to, the Israeli government structure and good old Netanyahu himself, he apparently, from what I've been reading and hearing, he's been in quite a bit of, he's been seen rather unfavorably in recent times by his own people, right? So lo and behold, what a beneficial coincidence this happens to be for good old Bibi, right?
Right. I mean, it's so evident that he was on his way out. I mean, he has so much of a backlash. The people are against him. And I've done the research with a lot of the Israeli newspapers are very critical. They blame it on him, which is rightfully where it should be. Of course, again, you got to look at the bigger picture. Bibi is a puppet, just as every single president, prime minister, they're all just puppets. They all do what they're told. There is a high command elite that have been running everything for centuries, and they are the ones that give these orders and demands to the puppets. So, but yeah, how convenient. This guy was on his way out, and now he's looked upon by the world, oh, this poor man, just trying to protect his people, and it's sickening. It's sickening to have to go through this over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed some of the, the sort of, I guess people would call them the conservatives, the right-leaning, influencers or talking heads, like, for example, Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. They've been on this. They've been on the bandwagon of, give them hell, hit them harder than they hit you. Like, It's like, instead of stepping back and advocating for like a next level, like a meta level understanding, how do we work this shit out? How do we figure out a way towards peace? How do we neutralize and defuse this situation? They're actually out there in the public with their massive audiences calling for blood. And it's the blood of the innocent Palestinians that's being spilled right now. It's not the people who they think these mysterious bogeymen who are being decimated. It's the innocent men and women who've had their water shut off and their power shut off and all this stuff. I mean, when you see like Jordan Peterson saying something so stupid as "give them hell," what goes through your head?
I mean, I've seen him interviewed, and he represents a lot of the truth. He's got a lot of insight. I've looked up to him, actually. He's a fellow psychologist, therapist. But when you see him make these kind of comments, it's like, has he been bought and sold too? Right. And there is some evidence that he has. So it's like, and there's a lot of people, quote, influencers that are very popular and have big following and have a lot of money, people sending money to their cause. And, I think they're spreaders of disinformation themselves a lot of the time. Maybe they get some shit right, but, I think a lot within the, quote, alternative news media, I think they are bought and sold. They're not much different from the ones in the government offices, Yeah. So yeah, very disappointing to see that.
Yeah, and I think it was on his podcast possibly, or somewhere he actually got to interview. You may have seen it. He got to interview Bibi Netanyahu, and they had this conversation that I saw part of. And some of the stuff that Netanyahu said was so ludicrously disingenuous and dishonest and inaccurate that I can't believe that he even felt like he could get away with it. But Peterson didn't pull him up at all. Like when Netanyahu says things like, we've never hurt any Palestinians, this kind of stuff, nobody got hurt when we did this thing or that thing. And it's just pure fantasy. Like if you go and actually look at the evidence, it's like thousands and thousands of people died, right? But no, that didn't happen according to Bibi. Like, I mean, what goes through your head when you see this guy operating?
Terrible. It's terrible. I didn't see that interview, and I think I just get upset if I did. But it's nauseating to see the brown nosing, Peterson to do that. I mean, that's incredible. Cannot call him on it, because I've always looked at Peterson like, well, he tells a lot of truth, so you would think that he would be, shooting holes through Netanyahu's bullshit. But yeah, it's very disappointing, and it just tells me that a lot of the alt news media has been bought out, and I think that there are people that tell too much truth that are always kept down from getting a big following. I actually believe this, and they will make certain selected individuals very popular, and they tell a lot of truth, but not the whole truth, and they keep a lot out, where it's untouchable topics. So yeah, I'm disappointed in the whole alt news biz. There's a lot of disappointment to go around, but the evidence of this being an inside job, it's their Pearl Harbor, it's their 911, all in-house made. And also, I mean, you can just go back in a little bit of history. Netanyahu has supported Hamas. He's come out against Abbas, the guy from the Palestine Authority that's been around forever. He's 87 years old now. And it's the same old method: divide and rule, divide and rule. You keep them apart, the West Bank following, and then the Gaza, and that's how he's maintained control. But he has actually funded Hamas. I mean, just like they funded the Al Qaeda, they funded ISIS. They're behind, and America's right there with them, and the Gulf states too, the Arab Gulf states. They're all guilty of funding terrorism around the world, because that's their little proxy war of terror. And so they keep people afraid and controlled. And it's just divide and rule, divide and rule. They keep using it. And that, along with the dialectic of, introducing the problem that's all theirs, that they created, and then they get the reaction to scare people of all this bad, bad, bad. And then they bring in their solution, which is more control. And they keep recycling this dialectic over and over. So between deception, divide and rule, and the dialectic problem, reaction, solution, bam, dystopia, here we are, totalitarian police state, Marxist totalitarianism. We have no more, republic where there's freedom and liberty. It's all the Constitution. It's all been just, it's a lawless world right now where anything goes. I mean, they're running out of funds for Ukraine. So what do? All that money, that's Russian money, that they froze in all the accounts, and we're talking billions, because of the sanctions. So what do? Now they're going to be spending Russian money to continue funding, arming Ukraine to kill Russians. I mean, they will use anything. Nothing is there. There's no ethics or principles or morality. And it is a Sodom and Gomorrah world. It really is,
Do you think is there an issue? I mean, speaking of money, right? Can you do you have anything else to add around the issue of money, being channeled towards Israel or through Israel? Is there a money laundering aspect to what we're seeing now? In connection with the Ukraine thing, because we know the Ukraine was a massive money laundering operation in part.
Yeah. As far as Israel's involvement, that they're involved. I mean, they and Ukraine. Well, first of all, there's a large Jewish, quote, Ashkenazi Jewish population in both of those countries. Zelensky has said, we are the second Israel, it's all about, and then there's a whole movement where, Kissinger himself said, and it was like 2015, he said it a long time ago, and by 2024, 25, he said there's not going to be in Israel, and it could well happen, actually. But there's a whole plan that they've got very organized where there are the Israeli citizens that are going to be relocating in their ancient homeland, Ukraine. And so it's all been planned out. I mean, when Zelensky made his fundraising trip to America a few weeks ago, where did he go? Of course, he went to Washington and Biden and the Congress and all this bullshit. But he also went to New York, where, of course, the UN General Assembly was active. It opened up again, more sessions, and he did his thing there. But he had a little secret meeting at the JP Morgan Bank headquarters. And who shows up? Oh, the ex-mayor, billionaire Michael Bloomberg. That Fink guy, the head of BlackRock, he was there. All these big money lenders, the Jewish money lenders that are all set to take pieces of Ukraine and profit by it. They were all there at this meeting. And they called it, I think the Daily News ran the article, and they called it a secret meeting. Yeah. But yeah, this is how these people operate, and you better believe that Israeli interests, Rothschild. By the way, the Rothschilds they're the founders of Israel. Without their influence and power and control, there wouldn't be a Jewish state,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and they're not Jews, they're Satanists, so.
They're definitely not practicing Jews.
They are not. And they're the epitome of this Ashkenazi-Khazarian mafia. And their little chieftain, their little puppet chieftain is Netanyahu, of course. The longest running leader of Israel in all of history since 1948, and boy, he's a bloodthirsty butcher and a total Satanist. And if he's not, well, he's Illuminati, he's Zionist, you can throw all those labels and they all fit,
It's interesting. What I was going to say here. So one thing I wanted to address in this episode was something that a lot of people get stuck on or just can't seem to kind of get their heads around, is that there's the people of Israel and there's the people of Palestine. And then, we have the people of Australia, and then we have the government of Australia, and we have the government of Israel and the government of Palestine. And these corporate, essentially fictitious corporate legal entities, they're not synonymous with the people. They're not, when we criticize the state of Israel, what we mean is we are talking about the government of Israel, this criminal entity, this absolutely psychotic entity. We're not saying the people are this thing. We're not saying the people are the same. I think we could probably both agree most Israelis are probably decent people. And I know that a lot of them are sick and tired of the violence, the ongoing conflict, and they've made efforts at a grassroots level with Palestinians to try to move past this stuff. But the government does not want that. The government doesn't give a shit about the people on either side at all. It's obvious that they don't give a shit about the Israeli people. Yeah.
Again, you have to realize the bigger picture where all the governments, and I write about this almost in every article now because it's so important to grasp the bigger picture. Every government is basically a LLC for the Illuminati controllers of this earth, the dynasty bloodline families that have been, doing all the puppetry with the puppets that they select mostly. It's all rigged elections now. People have to get beyond it and say, well, it's not this country versus this country. It's not even this government versus this government. It's the people that are pulling all the strings that are pitting these different groups together in their name, really, because it's all their action. The puppets just do what they're told. That's all they do. And then they're in front of the cameras, they're the front people. But, if you want to look into a little bit beyond that, then just go to the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, go to Henry Kissinger and Associates, go to the Rothschild banking dynasty, and how they managed to get control, where they basically create all the conflicts and the wars in the world and then reap all the financial benefits that only increases their power to buy off with bribery and sexual blackmail, with trafficking children and all of this. And they own the world. They own the media. They own every aspect of our lives except our hearts and our souls. Maybe those are the only things left. The minds are gone for the most part. Yeah, more people are catching on, but they've been brainwashed so long now. So basically, it's just the heart and the soul. They don't quite have that because they don't even have a soul. I don't even believe some of these people are even human. They're what they call the Nephilim, the fallen angels, the Satan crowd, They're not even human, and they're total psychopaths. It's inbred, and they don't have the same DNA as regular humans. They don't. They're very different. And if you want to go a little further, and I know it's woo land when you talk about this, but they are shape-shifting reptilians. Many of them are. But we won't go there because, some people just can't handle the truth when it comes to that area. But why do you think they're doing this whole push now with the aliens? Everything's the aliens now. That because they're planning on on his deathbed, the Nazi that they brought over from Germany at the end of World War II, Werner von Braun, the first NASA director, on his deathbed, he told his assistant, and he said to her many times, they're going to do an alien invasion that's going to be all man-made, and it's going to basically put people into their cages of new world government. It'll be used as the last resort for complete, absolute dystopian kind of power control.
Yeah.
And, they brought out a few of the, quote, insiders that working in NASA, and they tell their stories. And yeah, there are aliens, but a whole bunch of them aren't. It's man-made. It's reverse engineered stuff that they are putting out there. But obviously, we'd have to be totally oblivious to reality to think that this little speck over here called the Earth is the only, quote, intelligent. And I use that euphemistically because obviously, look what humans do to each other. How intelligent is that? But anyway, you get my point. We're not alone. And then there's been situations at military bases, they're ready to fucking bring out the big silo nuclear, and all of a sudden everything's neutralized and shut down. And then they actually see the actual UFOs doing this, So yeah, there are, the Earth is a way station for all of these different extraterrestrials that have been coming here. They've splintered the Homo erectus to form Homo sapien, all of this stuff. I get into a chapter on that in the Pedophilia and Empire book series on one. But yeah, there's a big picture here, a lot to it.
Yeah, that's right. And so many rabbit holes. And what, for the record, if anyone's wondering what Joachim said about the aliens or UFOs shutting down, nuclear weaponry and, interfering with these installations is a documented fact. And there are videos even showing this stuff happening. Well, not a lot of videos, but, it is a documented fact. So do you think the alien invasion is something is that a card they'll be playing soon, do you think, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that they bringing out these whistleblowers from NASA and kind of introducing and releasing more documentation on it. So yeah, they're leading up to it. Like I said, there's a race with time. The people are getting more information about what's going on, and they know that there's going to be a backlash and there's going to be demand for accountability, and so that's why they're escalating all these weapons of mass destruction that they're using. They're converging all these crises on us for depopulation to neutralize our strength to hold them accountable. I mean, it's all about saving their own ass at this point. And they will use that card. I say, oh, they have plan A, plan B, down to plan Z, and maybe that's plan Z is the alien invasion type thing.
Yeah, yeah. And you in your article, you do mention this, the foresight and how many, backup plans that these people seem to have organized in advance. I want to quote from your article here. You have a great quote from Ron Paul going back some 14 years. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read this because I want people to hear it from Ron Paul, because I know that this guy has been onto this for a long time, and he wouldn't have taken the House floor and said this unless he had a very good reason to. So what he said was, what's happening in the Middle East, in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. We have a moral responsibility, especially now today. The weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds are being used for this. But there's a political liability, which I think is something we fail to look at too often, because there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, it was better then and it served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. And they do, and they elect Hamas. So we first, indirectly and directly through Israel, helped establish Hamas. Then we have an election where Hamas becomes dominant. Then we have to kill them. It just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, we were allied with Osama bin Laden, and we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA thought it was good if we radicalized the Muslim world. So we financed the madrasas school to radicalize the Muslims in order to compete with the Soviets. There's too much blowback. There are a lot of reasons why we should oppose this resolution. It's not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of Israel either.
It's been the same old story for many, many years, and nothing has changed, except there are less Palestinians that are working on, getting rid of. I mean, they still, the population of Gaza, the average age is 18. Can you believe that? I mean, they're young. So they are producing new generations, at least. That's good, actually, because they're trying to wipe out all the basically Palestinians. And they've been at it, since 1947. They've been at war and going on like this. They've been their target. And it's been, the whole world has just passively not even watched. They don't pay attention. And it's so ingrained now, the old Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's like, it's like, people don't even think about it anymore because it's always been so much there. But it's tolerated. The inhumanity that's been going on, all the crimes, all the international crimes, they've gotten away with it for decade after decade. I mean, and Ron Paul was telling the truth. And there's so much evidence that Israel basically propped up Hamas as their divide and rule, and keep them locked up in their open air prison. I mean, the evidence is so overwhelming. And yet, does anything change? No, because the U.S. backs and supports everything. I mean, I actually believe that Israel is the one that's in control of the United States. Look how much money goes out from the taxpayers of America to Israel. Every 10 years, there's like another 38 billion They were always given the most money by the American taxpayers, more than any other nation on the earth, until Ukraine. Now that's surpassed now. I think it's up to 113 billion now for Ukraine, and going up all the time. They're lumping in now. Now they're, because there are a few Republicans that are actually maybe Republicans. They're not a uniparty completely. They got rid of the House Speaker for that reason, because he's uniparty. Anyway, the point I'm making is they're lumping in now. See how all these things operate? They're lumping in money for Israel. Oh yeah, it's like stand up for Israel, stand up for Ukraine, So now they're going to try and do a package deal where money goes to Israel and then it's siphoned off and goes to Ukraine. Because there were Republicans that are real reluctant now to send any more tax-paid dollars to Ukraine. So they're finding ways. It's all interconnected.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's worth, almost worth repeating for people, is that connection there, because it's going to be overlooked and it's going to be whitewashed. The fact that they're using Israel as a way to continue funding the Ukraine sort of indirectly. Joachim, I want to get a comment from you. As I mentioned earlier at the start, I got this message from a guy who I knew like 20 years ago, 10 minutes before we were scheduled to begin the show. And he was very clearly very pissed off at some of the observations I've been making, right? This is a guy who's clearly not been reading very widely. And one of the things that he says, and this is coming back to like that tribalistic aspect that we were talking about, and this just blew my mind. I mean, aside from the general sort of lack of comprehension, this in particular, what I want to read, this one sentence, was mind-blowing to me, because it's like, you could be completely lazy and apathetic and still know that this is wrong. You don't have to lift a finger researching this, but obviously, people like you and me who are actively interested, we look into these things. But I mean, I've been interested in this for 15, 20 years, and I'm sure you've been interested in this stuff for longer than that. He said to me, amongst his other very misguided comments, he said, yes, civilians on both sides are being killed, but only one side is killing them based on hate of someone, based on their beliefs. And I just thought, what an incredibly, I mean, he must have been living in a cave or something to think that there's no, Israelis out there who actually harbor a deep-seated hatred and loathing for the Palestinian people. I mean, this is so widely documented, and it's partly a religiously based thing, right? I mean, what are your thoughts when you hear someone say something like that?
Totally brainwashed. I mean, that you hear the expression, they use it all the time. Israelis or Jews, we have the right to defend ourselves. They use this whole mind control where the Arabs are hateful toward Jews. They really hate us, and they do not. Their whole thing is they want to destroy the Jewish state. I mean, when this is kind of brainwashed into many generations of non-Jews. I mean, this guy's not a Jew, right?
No, well, this guy actually has a Jewish background, so he's got connections. He's tied into it, so he's in the bubble.
Amongst the Jews, they go this way, but
you're right.
A lot of just regular people buy into this shit. Where it's all about defending religion, and these poor are persecuted. They've been persecuted for centuries. Yeah, there's a reason. They're criminals. Yeah, I mean they were banished from UK centuries ago, and they tend to be banished from all kinds of places. They're kind of like the Jesuits, which are very much related. Actually, they were crypto Jews. The earliest guy in Spain that started it, he was a crypto Jew. The Jesuits I'm talking about, and they infiltrate. I mean, it's all the same kind of methodology of subversive infiltration, and then they assassinate and do all this horror, changing history for the worse, obviously. But you just got to call the ones that are doing the criminal activity what they are, and that behavior we know about, and we're not going to accept it, and we're going to do everything we can to hold them accountable. Now, that's a big question mark, too. How do you do that? Because they control all the courts, they control the media, they control the governments, so, that's a very good question. How can we do that? They have this divide and rule down so well that the people have not really united. And I see even within the alt media, so many people, there's so many factional, tribal kind of behaviors, jealousy, and all of this kind of shit going on amongst this quote alt media that's supposed to be all about getting the truth out there, So it's like they have that control just through their methodology of keeping people pitted against each other, ununited, disunited, and and therefore getting away with all their crimes over and over. We see it. So yeah, that's the big challenge we face. Because they own the court systems. I mean, George Soros has bought off a lot of the district attorneys, the attorney generals. The whole court system of the United States has been completely captive now by those George Soros types. Occasionally, you might run into a judge that's actually clean and honest and trying to do the right thing, upholding the law. But that's more of an exception, definitely an exception. They're all corrupt and they're all bought, almost. Mm-hmm. It's real bad. And that's why we don't see, all this evidence of a pandemic being a depopulation, premeditated murder agenda, all the evidence out there. Is there any kind of court action? Has one attorney general in any state actually gone to court, and has any judge even listened? No, it's like they're bought and sold. And so it's like all the institutional structure, the infrastructure of government and courts, they're not on our side. So, yeah.
No, I mean, if we think back to the Credit River decision, if you've heard of that, I think that goes back some decades now, but the judge there who actually made the right call in support of the people, we the people, ended up dead very shortly after that. And that was many, many years ago. So to your point, yes, it is very heavily infiltrated and controlled now. It's getting back to Gaza. What kind of situation are the people of Gaza in now at this point with Israel, the government of Israel, escalating its violence against them now?
They're wiping them out. I mean, have you seen some of those photos? I mean, it's just total plunder of all these buildings. And they're just coming at them on an hourly basis with airstrikes and artillery hits. And I mean, they're pulverizing what's left of this narrow little strip where it's highly condensed people. The population density of Gaza is above everything everywhere else on the earth almost. So there are thousands that are dying, and they got the green light. The whole world's behind it, clapping. It's insane. It's insane what's happening. Where's the humanity left in people, to understand the horror that's being put on these poor people that have nothing to do with Hamas. So most of the civilian population, there hasn't been a Hamas election since 2006. It's like they're completely separate. 90% of all the people in Gaza have nothing to do with Hamas. It's, and yet they are the victims of all the bombs being dropped. It's like, well,
it's a horror show. It's awful, and I'm glad you make the point about people's humanity. I mean, that's really what this boils down to. Is we need to find a way to rise above this. They did this, they did that. Let's tit for tat, eye for an eye kind of stuff. It's getting us absolutely nowhere, and nobody in their right mind, who is in their right mind, is going to be cheering for the deaths of anybody. I don't care who it is, whether it's people in the Israeli population or the Palestinian population. If you find yourself on one of those sides barracking for that team and cheering for the deaths of these people, you have lost your mind. You are absolutely not in your right mind. You have been wetikoed completely. And you mentioned in your article here, mate, in the space of 4 days, over 260,000 Palestinians have become displaced.
Now it's up to 340,000. It's going up by the day by 100,000 every day. I mean, they're wiping out Gaza. I mean, they plan to basically take over and move the Israeli citizens in and just completely displace, the poor Palestinians. It's just unbelievable what's being allowed to happen now.
Yeah, it is. It's mind-blowing. I mean, they've held Palestine as an open-air prison for decades. I mean, sorry, for the Gaza Strip in particular as an open-air prison for decades. And now, it's just like that final push, right? Wipe it out, take it over. How do you see this, in connection with the Greater Israel Project? Can you maybe make a comment or two about the Greater Israel Project in all of this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have maps of Palestine and then Israel when it came to be in 1948. And over the years, you see the Palestinian, environment just shrink into, like, now it's going to be nothing because they'll pulverize everything. That's the internal Greater Israel Project they've been working on. But there's the external of taking Arab lands, expanding the borders of Israel into Lebanon and other areas, Syria. They have, I mean, it's been around for a long time, this plan of expanding Israel, expanding the power. The protocols of Zion, they pretty much called it as far as what's going to happen. And Albert Pike, a Confederate general, back in 1871, wrote to Giuseppe Mazzini, the head Freemason of Italy, and he was spelling out there's going to be 3 world wars, and the 3rd world war is going to be Islam versus Judaism war, and it's going to be Armageddon in the Middle East. And here we go, 152 years later. It looks like it's being played out as we speak.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to think, disturbing maybe I should say, to think about as Israel, say the state of Israel, the government expands the territory that they're claiming, the territory of Israel. I mean, the Israeli government, through the scamdemic, treated its population with a very, very heavy hand. And what we're seeing around the world is this push, the WEF talks about it all the time, this push towards smart cities, total digital surveillance, total digital control. And this is all going to what's the word I'm looking for here? This is all dovetailing. It's all moving in the same direction. I shudder to think what these places would be like to live in the Greater Israel region in 5, 10, 20 years, when they've actually got these cities set up and they have the level of surveillance and control over the population. I mean, we saw how they treated their own people in Israel, and it was absolutely abhorrent during the scamdemic, with all the the poison, the injections, and all this stuff, and the mandates. Life under that total digital surveillance control system in Greater Israel, I mean, I can't think of a more dystopian kind of a vision for the future.
That's where they're headed for all of us. They have this agenda that they're going to captivate all of humanity within those smart cities and total 24-hour surveillance. You cannot, everything's digital, so you can't, use cash. That's going to be outlawed. I mean, that's their agenda. We've known about it now for quite a few years. And now they're implementing it. And I mean, they have all kinds of plans for, the demolish Ukraine. That's what they do. They demolish entire cities and city-states and nations. And then they bring in, their agenda of smart city control, dystopic control. And that's what's, their agenda is, their aim all over the earth. uh, along with wiping out like 90 to 95% of the population.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, at this point, I feel like the basics of, I don't know, the Israel-Palestine situation are, we've more or less covered, I think, the essentials. Or do you feel like we've overlooked anything? I think it's very interesting to me, the idea that they're pushing this. Oh, it was a surprise attack, and you've spoken to this already, but they're going to run with this. Oh, they took us by surprise. The most heavily fortified nation in the Mideast, biggest nuclear arsenal, and you talk in detail about the defenses they've got around Israel, like former IDF soldiers talking about sensors that go off if so much as a cat walks past or near the wall, robotic weaponry installed at the border. They've got these. Where is it? I'm going to find it here. They spent December 2021, in your article, you say the Israeli government spent nearly $1 billion over a span of 3 years. I think you mentioned this earlier, building this defense wall involving a multiple chain-linked 30-foot structure virtually impenetrable without immediate security defense forces being dispatched to the scene. So immediately they're going to be there within minutes. But we've been told that this supposed Hamas attack, there was no response for like 4 or 5 hours or something. I mean, this is very difficult.
The majority of the IDF force is actually in the West Bank.
Right.
They redeployed them for this whole operation. And that's what my point earlier at the very beginning was. That is a pattern that they do when they do all these false flags. They take out the, quote, people that are in control that would stop it. Mm-hmm. So over and over and over again, we see that pattern. And so here we are, they, and of course they have their plans for the West Bank. They've been doing the expansion of the settlements, the Israeli settlements, and pushing that agenda. And then I make the point that we have people in the government, including the minority leader in the House, and the people in the Defense Department, State Department. They're all saying another unprovoked attack. What they used in Ukraine, same deal. And the reality is, look at what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinians forever, and you say this is unprovoked. In 2023, there have been 248 deaths of Palestinians in these areas that they've been controlling and taking over. They took over a mosque, I believe, in the West Bank, shortly, just like 3 or 4 days before the, quote, invasion, the surprise attack. 3 or 4 days, they took over a mosque. I believe it might have been West Bank or something like that. No, I think it was actually East Jerusalem. They did that. And it was all IDF coordinated, Yeah. So, unprovoked, get off your lies.
I mean, it's hard to believe they can still trot that line out after the 70 years plus of just brutal occupation of the lands of Palestine. But yeah, it was, in your article, you do say they reportedly stormed the East Jerusalem Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, which was under the protection of the Israeli forces. So yeah, if they weren't at the point, if someone wasn't at the point of feeling like they were going to take action, you'd have to wonder how much provocation would it take to get a response. But of course, we know that that's the surface level stuff, and we know that Hamas is not how it's presented in the media, and we know that the Israeli government is not what it's presented as in the media. Mossad. It goes on and on. The reason I keep drawing our attention back to this stuff is because we have to get past this. The media programming and media narrative, which is designed to put us into one camp or the other, and then keep us fighting and bickering and distracting and harvesting energy and feeding energy into a conflict that most of us are not directly affected by, maybe some of us indirectly. But this is a thing, like, to create a healthy boundary and a healthy distance and an understanding of, hey, there's something more going on here, which is why we're talking about this stuff. But what's being presented is a very, very heavily distorted, manipulated version of events.
Right. Yeah. Somebody's got to tell the truth.
Well, that's why we're here getting paid the big bucks to do it, mate.
Right.
Yeah, well, okay, mate. I feel like this is a kind of a natural conclusion point. And I really, really do appreciate you getting up at a horrendous hour of the morning to have a chat with me, 6 a.m. your time. Maybe you could let people know where to say follow your writing, catch your writing, or best ways to keep in contact with you.
Okay. I'm writing for jameshfetzer.org. Jim Fetzer, great man. Boy, he's like the godfather of all false flags, going back to the JFK assassination. Anyway, his site, jameshfetzer.org. I put all my writing on. Also, the governmentrag.com. There's another good site. And even my old editor at Veterans Today, Gordon Duff, is putting all my work on his site, inteldrop.org. And then other sites pick it up occasionally. And then you can find, and I do a radio show, a revolution radio show. You go to the archives if you're not awake at 6 a.m. on Friday morning, East Coast time. But yeah, I do a news review, 2 hours on the radio every week up with Revolution Radio, and get into a lot of this. And then you can find my 5 books on the topic of the pedophilian empire, Satan, sodomy, and the deep state, for free on pedoempire.org. And then, if you want the actual paperbacks, you can order them on Amazon.
Beautiful. Yeah. And thanks for mentioning that. I wanted you to make sure you did mention that, because that is a great reference for anyone who wants to, dive into that subject and get a better handle on it. And also, if I may say so, a tremendous, contribution and service to humanity. The fact that you put so much time and effort into that and literally giving it away just because this is work that needs to be done. So I salute you for that, mate. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's been a pleasure chatting again. And I will, look forward to our next conversation, Joachim.
Yeah. We'll keep in touch. We're warriors on the same path. Truth.
No doubt, brother. The truth path. All right, brother. You take care. We'll leave you to it.
All right, Brandon. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye. So just to conclude, I agree with a lot of what Joachim says. And the reason I harp on, if you feel like I'm harping on, I sometimes feel like I am maybe, but I focus on a certain few key points to really try to drive them home, because this is the stuff that is overlooked, intentionally omitted by the mainstream in general, and by, these silly, whatever you want to call them, alt-right people who should know better, Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, who are essentially baying for the blood of the people of Palestine by cheering on the absolutely demented criminal government of Israel, which doesn't give a shit about its people. It's all that posturing about caring about its people is nonsense. I mean, how much empathy and compassion could that entity have if you look at the way that it's dealt with the people of Palestine over the last 7 decades plus? Zero compassion, zero empathy, nothing, nada, zip, zero. And that was what we saw through the scamdemic, the way that it treated its own citizens. So please don't fall for the nonsense that the Israeli government cares about the Israeli people at the highest levels. It doesn't. It's serving a completely different master, a completely different agenda. My interest, or one of my interests in talking to Joachim, was to get past the mainstream narrative of, this team versus that team and this tribe versus that tribe, and to help people who are maybe in the camp of my old mate here who called me delusional by saying the things that I've been sharing, drawing attention to the fact that Hamas was the state of Israel helped create Hamas. And how absurd the narrative is. The narrative in these psyops is always completely absurd. It never adds up. It never makes sense. Israel is the most heavily fortified, defended entity in the Mideast. The idea that, people could just parachute in there, guns blazing, without them knowing about it in advance, or at least finding out before it reached its bloody climax is ludicrous. And I just want people, my goal is to move people beyond where, to help if they want to move beyond where people like the Jordan Petersons and Ben Shapiro's are stuck at, in the perspective that they hold and are promoting, and the tribalism and the lack of care and lack of humanity that they are pushing. And what we can do, for the most part, most of us are not directly affected by this. I know some people, I recently had a conversation with Adam Bigelson, who has been on the podcast, say 4 months ago, roughly. And he's connected to. We have a bunch of mutual friends, and one of those mutual friends knows some people who lost friends in Israel through this Hamas attack. So I'm not here to say that something didn't happen. I'm not here to say that people weren't hurt, killed. I'm not here to say that it wasn't atrocious and appalling, because any form of violence like this is atrocious and appalling. I don't care who it's directed at. It's never justifiable, and it's never acceptable. And we've got to move past this reactionary mindset of, oh, well, let's, give them hell because let's, bring the hammer down on them and blow them to smithereens, forgetting the fact that the vast majority of people who live in Gaza and Palestine have nothing to do with what happened and would not have supported it. And they're the ones who are going to be paying with their lives now that the Israeli government is basically leveling Gaza. As Joachim said, over 300,000 displaced Palestinians at this point, and counting. That number apparently is going up very quickly. So that is the level of care and concern that the government of Israel has towards Palestinians and its own people. Zero. As I said earlier in the show, the government of Israel thinks nothing of psyoping its own people, brainwashing them, manipulating them, lying to them, and fomenting this ongoing conflict and hostility. They do it intentionally through the IDF in part and through the media, controlled, bought, paid for media. And, the people like Jordan Peterson should know better. They should know better. And if you're not going to say something that is, helping to foster or encourage peace, or something more constructive than violent reactionary attitudes and calls for blood, if you're not going to do better than that, shut the fuck up. You're not helping. You are actually creating a situation here, indirectly helping to support the mass murder of many, many thousands of people. So please, let's try to raise ourselves above that level of petty, egoically driven, programmed, manipulated, brainwashed perception, and we can do better. I mean, Jordan Peterson, as a psychologist, should know better than that. But he's made it pretty plain where a bunch of his limitations lie over the last several years, starting with pushing the pointy thing, and this kind of idiotic rhetoric that just serves nobody and just encourages this mindless, moronic violence. So we need to do better. And what we can do on the outside, looking in, most of us are not directly affected by this. What we can do is simply step back, keep your distance from it emotionally. Don't get sucked into the emotional reactionary vortex. Step back, look at it more objectively, more dispassionately, understand that there are hidden agendas playing out, no doubt, multiple levels of this, multiple levels. And we're never going to know the full story. We never will. We're not in those meetings. We're not in those rooms. We're not able to be the fly on the wall, so to speak. But what we can do is hold a space of coherence on a personal level, which means not being reactionary, not falling into rage, outrage, hatred, any of that sort of stuff towards that end of the spectrum is not helpful. What we want to do is foster coherence, which means go into a space of quietude, peace, love, whatever, anything in that direction. Anything in that direction moves you towards coherence. And as we know from, for example, the Maharishi experiments, we know about the Maharishi effect. A very small number of people have when they are in unison and in coherence, holding the same intention, they have a massive, massive effect on far greater numbers of people, exponentially larger numbers of people. So I think it was the square root of 1% of the number of people in a town or city, square root of 1%. If they sit in coherence with the same intention, they can actually alter the entire group collective of that region in that town or city. So what we can do around the world is something similar. We can create our own Maharishi effect. What we need to do is sit in coherence, sit in a state of, let's say, call it walking the middle way, for want of a better term, and not get sucked into the emotional game that is being played here, the manipulation, the harvesting of energy, the harvesting of loosh, if you want to use that term from Robert Monroe's books. And let's rise above it. Let's rise above these stupid narratives, both in the mainstream and also the alt-right, the talking heads, who are still, manipulating and playing this game and serving the beast, so to speak. Let's rise above it. Hold space for something better. Hold space for peace. Hold space for actual progress and moving forward. If you want to send intention of something constructive, the intention of peace, something generic, it's fine, it's good, it's constructive, you can do that. Send it into the region, send it into the people of Palestine, the people of Israel. I'm not sure what extent you might be able to affect the government, but these things are what we can do on the outside looking in as observers, and not get sucked into playing this stupid low-level game that so many are being manipulated by right now. So I hope that makes it relatively clear where I stand on this, where I'm coming from. I just am sick and tired of the bloodshed. I'm sick and tired of the violence, the manipulation, and the lies drive me nuts. That's why I do this, because the level of deception and the manipulation of people's perception in these matters, and far beyond these matters, every major thing that reaches the news, every big world event, global event, whatever, it's always the same story. It's always about manipulating the perception of the masses. So don't be part of the masses. We need to remember our individuality and our responsibility to hold coherence and hold space for peace and something better than what is currently unfolding in many, many places on many levels. So appreciate the time listening. Appreciate you being here. If you like what you've heard, if you enjoyed the interview, found it useful, please do share it around to your networks, subscribe. And if you didn't like it, well, thanks for listening to the end anyway. And I look forward to seeing you and catching up on the next episode. I believe it will be with Sam Higgins, who is one of the more interesting and intelligent humans and multidimensional humans that I've ever met. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Until then, take care, rise above the nonsense, and I'll see you then. If you're a discerning, open-minded, and dedicated seeker who loves a good deep dive into the nature of reality and consciousness, then do check out my book, The Grand Illusion, composed of over 10,000 hours of research and experience. Find more information and reader reviews at brendandmurphy.com/TGI.